Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller, and I am here to tell you what you are about to witness in my upcoming episode of Strong Mind, Strong Body. So, I share a DNA discovery that affected me personally, and I think it affects many, many, many people throughout our world. And that discovery rocked my world and really had me learning how to deal with uncertainty, but also leaning into resilience and making peace with my past and also learning how to create a fresh future. So I hope that you will tune in and you will share the episode with anyone that you know who has had a DNA discovery. And then after you watch, if you would like, follow, subscribe, and give me 5 stars, that would be amazing. I'll see you in the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. And I am seriously honored that you joined me for today's episode because today's topic is really important to me. And I believe honestly that it's important to our world at large because so many people have or will be affected by a similar experience. The truth is, though, despite being a therapist, a person who, theoretically helps you unpack whatever struggles you're trying to deal with at the time, I can struggle deeply to share my own personal struggles because that makes me vulnerable, right? And who really likes to be vulnerable? But this is something that I feel called to share. And since Cara, who was my guest on my last episode, she shared her story. So I thought, okay, if Cara has the courage to share, I should too. So today I'm not interviewing anybody. I'm my own guest, and so to speak. And because this story is so personal, and I fear that I might get emotional, which I cannot do that right now, I mapped it out so that I can stay on topic, and I'm not going to get into the weeds. So grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is that you like to drink. And whether you're in the car or you're watching on YouTube, I hope you'll just join me on this journey. Because my guess is, again, either you're walking this journey right now, or you know somebody who's walked it, or probably statistically, you'll meet someone someday who will, because statistically, the number of people who are doing genetic testing continues to grow. So I've learned through my personal experience that identity shifts can change our whole world. And we have to learn to navigate them so that we can build a new understanding of ourselves and one that honors who we thought we were, but we also have to make room for how we're going to discover who we can be or who we want to be in the future. But most importantly, I'm sharing today because I think it's really important that you give your pain purpose. I think when we go through the healing process, we help others heal and we help others to know that they're not alone. And that's really essential to moving through difficult times. So I'm going to take you back to where this all began. Okay, the moment that changed everything. So here's the deal. There's not a black label warning box on those consumer DNA tests that say, think before you spit. But in retrospect, I think maybe there should be. But when I look back, I don't know if I would have actually heeded that warning because I think in some ways it was the last thing on my mind, but I think subconsciously it was not. I think I'd always been a little curious and I always had some nagging questions in my mind. So I'm one of those people, like I mentioned earlier, and maybe you're one of those people too. I took a consumer DNA test because I wanted simple health and ancestry information, but I got more than I expected. In fact, there's a name for it. It's called NPE, not parent expected. So when my results came in, they didn't fit what I had been told. I was always told that I was part German, part Irish, and part Dutch. And I knew that on my grandpa's parents, on my mom's side, they had come from Germany. And I wasn't sure about my dad's side, but I understood that they too had a lot of German and Eastern European heritage. But when I got the email that my results were in and I logged into 23andMe, I was at a loss because it said that I was 49% Ashkenazi Jewish. So I just stared at the screen and I kept rereading it. And then I refreshed it like somehow it was going to change and they were going to go, oh, we made a mistake. Because 49% is not a margin of error. That's half of me. So what does that mean? Well, none of my sisters had tested yet, so I didn't know what to think. And honestly, my first thought was, these things are a joke. They're just a way for us to rope us into spending money, but they're not accurate. So I did that compartmentalizing thing that I always think that I'm super good at, like I'm an expert compartmentalizer. And I pack it away in my mental attic. And I think that it'll go dormant if I don't think about it. But denial works pretty good until it doesn't. And the thing is, we really can't ever pack things away. They eat away at us, they beg for our attention, and they impact us in ways that we never realize. So a few years goes by, and yes, you heard that right. I'm talking years, not months or days. And I get a call from one of my sisters. That's how long I packed it away. Turns out her daughters were curious too. So they had tested, unbeknownst to me. So my sister started by asking me, hey, Angie, have you ever tested through 23andMe? And of course, she knew that I had because they had shared their DNA results with her and they had, seen me on the screen. But she was being thoughtful and she was worried about how this might impact me. But the minute she said it, it was a reality check. And I knew those results were accurate, whether I wanted to face it or not. So I had to start to move from this complete denial to real world reality, but I wasn't quite ready. So I book a trip back to Iowa, where my sisters live, and I gift them all these DNA kits. And they were like, oh, no, I'm not testing. And I was like, oh, yes, you actually are. And a couple of my sisters gave me lots of rebuttal. And I said, you know what, do it for me. Okay, do it for me. I need more proof. And honestly, secretly, I didn't want to be the only outlier, but it turns out I was. So this is what happens when identity trauma hits. It's not just cognitive, it's whole body. And it's like your body knows before your mind can process it. So I felt a little shaky inside. I was kind of numb. I was angry. I was sad. I was overwhelmed. And then part of me was like, oh, this makes so much sense, right? And then the other part was like, wait a minute, who else knows? Who's been openly lying to me my whole life? So when your identity is suddenly in question and what you thought to be true is no longer true, a friend of mine calls it a personal narrative disruption, but I call it a sucker punch. When something happens that disrupts what we thought to be true, our mind can go to war. And we start questioning every memory, every relationship. We start to wonder what was real, what wasn't real. And the worst part is you don't even trust the truth anymore. You can't, because your mind says, well, if this was a lie, what else was a lie? So you constantly look back at things that happened, things that were said, and you go, is that what they meant? Or did they know? I started replaying my childhood like I was rewinding an old VHS tape. And I was stopping on moments that I thought suddenly felt different. Maybe simple comments about how I look different from my sisters, or offhand remarks, or the way certain family members would interact with me versus my siblings. Was that normal family dynamics, or did they actually know? So every family gathering I replayed in my mind. Conversations where there might have been awkward silences or questions that were unanswered, and most probably had no meaning whatsoever. But I was searching for clues that I didn't know how to look for at the time, because the doubt infiltrates everything. And it's not just about who my father is, it's about who can I trust, or what can I trust? Can I trust any story that I've ever been told? So what felt solid was that I was one of 5 sisters. I was the youngest. I understood where my features came from. I have my mom's build. I have her eyes. I have a lot of her same characteristics. And I knew about my grandparents, my heritage. I knew my family birth order. I belonged, right? But here's what crumbled: pretty much everything I just said. Because in my situation, anyone who could fill in the gaps for anything had already passed. My mom had passed, as had the dad that I thought was my dad, though he didn't really play a significant role in my life. And when people die, they take all the stories, they take their answers, and they take part of your history with them. So, side note, ask your people questions now if they're still here. So, if one of my parents was not, in fact, my biological parent, what other stories had been told? What was the truth and what was a lie? Were the stories about my birth accurate? Um, so every single narrative kind of started to unravel, and the betrayal started to sit in my chest like a weight. And some days it felt like anger, some day it was grief, some day it's just this hollow ache and this longing to know. And sometimes I just look and I think, I just want someone to say, "Hey, here's what happened, here's the truth." Because the human nervous system can live with certainty. We can live with like what we know. We can adapt, but we don't live well with uncertainty, right? Like if you're on the verge and you're like, "Oh, am I going to lose my job?" That's uncertainty. But if you say, "Okay, I'm going to lose my job in 2 weeks," now you know what's going to happen. So when you're in these situations, you're living with uncertainty. And so the thing is, all of that is sitting in your system. And it's important to understand in these situations also the isolation of being an outlier, right? So if you're a trainer or you're a coach or you're a therapist and you work with people who've had these situations, you need to realize that being an outlier changes things for people, because my system personally struggled with this discovery. I had feelings of betrayal of being an outlier among my own family system, not knowing how I came to be. And then there's also the impact of generational trauma and who out there might have information about my biological father. So I swam, and I still swim in this cesspool of what happened. Why did they lie? Why was I the only one? And, you set up family gatherings and you wonder if you actually belong there. You start to look at your sisters and think they have their full story. They have the whole complete picture. They know who their parents are. They know who they are, but I only have half a medical history, half a heritage, and half an identity. And the other half is out there somewhere. And people who maybe don't want to talk to me, or in records that don't exist, or in memories that died with the people who held them. So, no one in my immediate family, and I think this is a story for a lot of people who go through this, no one in my immediate family can really understand because they're not living this. They still have their complete story, and I'm the only one kind of living in limbo. And that isolation compounds the trauma in ways that most of us, or most people who haven't experienced it, can't really understand or expect. So the family that I'd always been a part of was still my family, or was it? So it's kind of a both and. And this is where I had to learn to hold complexity, because trust me, I love my sisters. I love my mom dearly. So I really had to learn to hold or to manage complexity and make sense of all these emotions. So I think this is critical to my healing and to yours, whether your identity shift is of this nature or whether you're going through an identity shift of another nature. I had to learn to hold the complexity of multiple emotions. I had to truly live by the principles of radical acceptance, that human emotions are not binary and that it's not either or, it's both and. So I have compassion for my mom, and I also feel a bit hurt and betrayed. Both are true, both are valid. I can understand very much so, believe me, why my mom carried the secret. And I can also carry worst case scenarios in my mind. Was she assaulted? Did she love this person? What made her keep it a secret? And these questions don't disappear because I have compassion. They actually coexist. So I personally, and this may not be the case with everyone, I personally can imagine the weight that my mom carried. I can imagine the fear, the shame, the impossible choice of whether or not to tell me. I can feel the tenderness for that young woman who found herself in whatever situation that led to my conception. And I can also feel the hurt and anger of a daughter who maybe would have benefited from knowing the truth, who deserved to know herself fully, who deserved to make her own choices about searching and connecting and knowing. It's both and. So I trained last year in internal family systems. And in this training, we talked about legacy burdens. And this brought a lot to the surface that I had tried to pack away. Legacy burdens don't disappear because we ignore them. And the impact of generational trauma, it ripples through our system, whether we acknowledge it or know about it or not. So this was the work I had to do. I had to learn to hold both and. I had to not force resolution. I had to not demand of myself that one feeling could cancel the other. And I think that this, in a nutshell, is how we all have to learn to manage stress in difficult situations. We have to build our capacity to hold complexity. But there's something else that goes along with this story. There can be heartbreak when you go to search for answers, and it doesn't always have a hallmark ending. And I think that this is worth sharing because this is the case with so much of identity shifts in our world, right? There's so much complexity in things that we go through that are very, very difficult to manage, whether it's divorce or breakups, or whether it is these kind of DNA experiences. So there's not always a hallmark ending, right? So recently, after all these years, I started searching because even though I was kind of terrified, truthfully, of the disappointment, the longing to know was stronger than my fear. So I hired DNA angels. But before that, I started with my mom's friends. I reached out to one of my mom's friends who claimed right away to know that he knew that I had a different dad. But he told me, are you ready for this? Not to worry about it because it was done and my mom loved me. So then he led me on this kind of wild goose chase, purporting to have insight into who it could be. But really, in truth, he didn't know. He was the husband of one of my mom's best friends, and my mom's best friend had died already. So he had overheard the conversations, but he really didn't have any answers. So I also reached out to one of my mom's best friends who's still alive, and she was genuinely, authentically shocked. So she had no answers. And then I reached out to my cousin, who was the daughter of my mom's sister. She too was genuinely surprised. So then I get to the DNA matches that show up on Ancestry and 23andMe. And this is where it gets really tough because the people who shared my genetic material, who might hold pieces of my story, two of my very closest matches, when I reached out to them and messaged them in the system, blocked the family trees so that I could no longer see them. Yeah, blocked them after I reached out, and I was crushed and angry. But it wasn't just the blocking. They also told me how to feel when I messaged them. Platitudes like, well, the family you grew up with was your real family. Well, of course I know this. Or just be happy you were raised by a good, loving family. But the thing is, this person, when I messaged them, didn't know if I was raised by a good, loving family or if I was raised by, a terrible family. It was insulting and presumptuous. So it's this dismissiveness that cuts really, really deep. So when you run into somebody with this situation, I hope you're listening because that dismissiveness is really, really hurtful. It's as if the family who raised you and the family you came from are mutually exclusive. It's as if asking questions about your origin, somehow people interpret that it negates the love you have for the people who raised you. And it absolutely does not. So it's almost like they're protecting their own comfort by shutting down of my very valid reason or my very valid need to know where I came from. So when you're already dealing with identity trauma, with unanswered questions and the loss of people who hold your answers, then when someone slams the door in your face and tells you to be grateful for what you have, that's not support, that's erasure. So finally, very recently, I hired DNA angels. They're amazing. And they are people who help you find your biological family. And I put my hope in their hands. And so far, I have to be honest with you, so far they're coming up with nothing. Could be my age. It could be the fact that most of the people are gone. It could be that not enough people of that generation tested. I don't know. But this truthfully was my fear all along. My fear was that I would try and I would put myself out there and then I would feel the disappointment all over again if they came up short. So here's the thing. For me personally, I still thought it was worth a try. I thought it was worth putting myself out there. I thought it was worth reaching out to strangers. I thought it was worth reaching out to family members. But I have to settle with the fact that the answer might never come. And that, yes, that is absolutely hard. So what do you do when you have access to all this information, but you still don't have answers or closure? Because knowledge is powerful, but knowledge, trust me, can also be very painful. So that brings me to, are you ready? Being able to practice what I preach and what I hope that you'll get from this episode. And that's that we can't get stuck on the thing that we can't change. For me, for a long time, my emotional energy was hijacked by my hurt and my pain and my frustration and my anger. So, and that wasn't getting me anywhere because no one was coming back to life to answer my questions and it wasn't going to change my situation. So the problem was going to stay the problem, whether I wanted to focus on it or not. But the more I focused on it, the more it kind of took over my life and my thoughts and my feelings, and it just didn't serve me well. So there is no real solution, right? So it's not really the solution. It's about, understanding that I just have to focus on what I can control. So like so many people out there, we're never going to have Hallmark closure ever. We are going to have to still, though, be able to find some clarity and some peace and some radical acceptance, because that's the only way we're going to be able to navigate this. So part of how I am finding clarity and peace and finding radical acceptance is I'm choosing to do the thing that terrified me the most, which was sharing with you and with other communities. I'm sharing my story to give my pain purpose, but also to put fear on its backside and to stand up and say, this is how we heal. So in March, I'm speaking at a conference called Untangling Our Roots. It's in Atlanta. And this is a conference specifically for people like me, NPEs, not parent expected, late discovery adoptees, donor conceived individuals, etc. People who have all had their identities disrupted by DNA discoveries. And I'm not just attending, I'm actually speaking about internal family systems and how we can hold complex emotions and multiple truths. So here's what I'm most excited about, though. Not just that I'm speaking, but that I hope to meet a whole community of friends who actually get it, who aren't going to give me platitudes, who understand and who don't need me to explain about why this matters or why I can't just let it go because they already know. I'm also going on podcasts to share my story, like Cara did on my show last week. And every time I share my story, something in me shifts. The shame loosens a little bit. The isolation feels a little bit less heavy, and I get my pain purpose. And that is healing. Not because I'm getting answers, not because the problem is solved, but because I'm being witnessed and because I'm turning this experience into something that might help someone else feel less alone. So here's my last thought. If you're out there, if you're a trainer, if you're a coach, if you are a provider of any sort, or if you're a friend or you're going through this, here's some things I think you need to know. When I started sharing this with people in my circle, I learned something really crucial about support. Some responses were super helpful and some were like, ouch, I can't believe that just came out of your mouth. So one of my friends actually said to me when I told her, "Oh, I don't believe those DNA tests," which completely negated my experience and bazillions of other people. I was like, what do you mean you don't believe in DNA tests? How do you not believe in science? So family members felt betrayed when I would ask questions, and I felt betrayed that they wouldn't answer. My sisters were afraid that if I talked about it, it would hurt my mom. And I feared that too. Honestly, I still fear that because I'm deeply protective of my mom. My mom is my hero. She was this fierce, tiny woman who gave her life to raising her 5 girls. And I am eternally grateful. And I can still feel hurt. Okay. So, my daughters and my spouse couldn't fully conceptualize the pain or the personal narrative disruption because they weren't living it either. So, what did help me? So, if you're, you know, being witness to this, here's what I think would help. Just people who said things like, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here. People who sat with me, didn't try to fix it, didn't try to minimize it. The ones who just said, what do you need right now? Instead of telling me how I should feel or what I should do, or instead of trying to shut me down because they were uncomfortable. So the thing is, consumer DNA testing is everywhere, and the holidays just passed. So trust me, a lot of your friends tested, and you might have too, because it's a big gift that people give at the holidays. So, but here's the conversation that we're not having. There's no preparation, there's no warning, and there's no acknowledgement that this could change everything. So we have to lean into our resilience, not toxic positivity, please, not by pretending it's fine. Real resilience for our ability to manage stress and navigate life changes that disarm us and strip us of our identity. So here's what this means: building a capacity for both and. You can love your parents and feel betrayed. You can feel like you belong to your family, and I do. My 4 sisters are my everything. Yes, of course, I belong to them. And I can also struggle and feel a bit like an outlier, a little jealous, if I'm to be honest with you. Second thing is you can allow uncertainty. Some questions might never be answered, right? Resilience isn't getting all the answers. It's just learning to live with what you know and make sense of it and make peace with it. And then find your people. Know that not everyone's going to understand, and that's okay. So find your people. Also, honor your body. It's not just a mental and emotional experience. Your body holds the story too. And then rewrite your narrative. Not erasing your old story, but expanding it, adding room for complexity and making space for the truth. And then my final thought is share your story when you're ready, if you're ever ready. And that's up to you, because story changing will change your relationship with the story and with your experience. So that to me is what strong mind, strong body really means. Not that we're unbreakable, but that we can hold our own, breaking and our own becoming at the same time. So if you're listening and you've had a similar experience, or you know someone who has, I want you to know first that you're not alone. There's a whole community of us out here. We're finding each other. But I also would love it if you would share it with someone who might really, really benefit from this episode. So again, I'm Angie Miller. Thank you so much for joining me on Strong Mind, Strong Body. And thank you for holding space for my story. I'll see you next time.